The space station's cantina buzzed with the usual mix of alien chatter and the low hum of recycled air. Commander Sarah sat alone at a corner table, nursing a synthetic whiskey that tasted nothing like the real thing she remembered from Earth. Her dark hair was tied back in regulation style, and her blue uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Space Fleet. She had been stationed on Nexus Station for 3 months now, serving as a liaison between human and alien forces in this remote sector of the galaxy. The cantina was a melting pot of species. Tall clicked their mandibles in conversation while Reptilian hissed their displeasure at the evening's entertainment. But it was the group of pilots at the center table that caught Sarah's attention. They were loud, boisterous, and clearly celebrating something. Were known throughout the galaxy as the finest pilots in existence. Their elongated skulls housed enlarged brains specifically evolved for spatial reasoning and reaction time. Their pale blue skin seemed to shimmer under the cantina's artificial lighting, and their forearms allowed them to operate controls that would be impossible for most species to manage. They had dominated space racing and combat flying for over 2 centuries. The leader of the group, a particularly imposing female with intricate tattoos covering her arms, stood up and raised her glass. "To another flawless victory," she announced in heavily accented galactic standard. "The humans thought they could challenge supremacy in the circuit, but once again we have proven that no species can match our natural gifts." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had heard about the circuit race. 3 human pilots had entered, and all 3 had been eliminated in the preliminary rounds. The media had been particularly cruel in their coverage, suggesting that humans were primitive primates pretending to be pilots. The pilot's name was Ra, and she was something of a celebrity. She had won the Galactic Championship 5 years running and held records on dozens of racing circuits across known space. Her reputation was built not just on skill, but on her notorious arrogance and her public dismissal of inferior species who dared to compete against. "I heard one of the human pilots actually cried when his ship spun out," Ra continued, her voice carrying across the cantina. "Perhaps they should stick to their little planetary atmospheric craft and leave real flying to those of us who evolved for it." Her companions laughed, a sound like tinkling bells that somehow managed to be condescending. Sarah felt her temper rising. She had been a test pilot before joining the diplomatic corps, and she knew exactly how skilled human pilots could be. The problem wasn't ability, it was equipment and experience with the specific demands of galactic standard racing. "Of course," Ra went on, "it's not entirely their fault. Humans are bound by their biology. 2 arms, limited neural processing, slow reflexes. They're simply not designed for the precision required in real piloting. It's like asking a ground crawler to swim in the deep ocean." That was enough. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the metal floor. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise, and several conversations paused. She walked over to the table, her boots clicking with military precision. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice calm and professional. "I couldn't help but overhear your analysis of human piloting capabilities." Ra turned, her large, dark eyes focusing on Sarah with obvious amusement. "Ah, a human. How delightful. Are you here to defend your species' honor?" She said the last word with clear mockery. "I'm here to suggest that your conclusions might be premature," Sarah replied. "You're basing your assessment on 3 pilots who had never flown galactic circuits before. That hardly represents the full scope of human capability." The pilot's expression shifted to one of theatrical surprise. "Are you suggesting that there are humans who could actually compete with pilots? How fascinating and utterly delusional." Her friends erupted in that bell-like laughter again. Sarah felt every eye in the cantina on her now. She was representing not just herself, but her entire species. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like gravity. "I'm suggesting," Sarah said carefully, "that you haven't faced the right human pilot yet." Ra leaned back in her chair, all 4 arms spreading in a gesture of mock consideration. "How intriguing. Are you volunteering, little human? Do you actually believe you could challenge me to a proper duel?" The word duel sent a ripple through the cantina. In culture, a pilot's duel was sacred. It wasn't just a race. It was a test of skill, courage, and honor. The challenged party set the terms, and both pilots flew to their absolute limits. It was not uncommon for pilots to die in such contests. "If that's what it takes to prove that humans aren't the inferior pilots you claim we are," Sarah said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Ra stood up slowly, her full height impressive even by standards. You have no idea what you're asking for, human. I have flown in ion storms, navigated asteroid fields at 90% light speed, and won races that killed half the participants. What makes you think a primitive biped could possibly match me? Sarah met her gaze without flinching. Only one way to find out. The pilot was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah with new interest. Very well, she said finally. I accept your challenge, though I warn you, I won't hold back simply because you're clearly outmatched. The terms will be a classic pursuit race through the Titan maze. Several aliens around the cantina gasped. The Titan maze was a notorious obstacle course in the asteroid field surrounding Nexus Station. It consisted of massive rotating metal structures, each one a kilometer wide and filled with spinning blades, plasma barriers, and gravity wells. It had been built as a training ground for elite pilots, but had become a proving ground for the most dangerous races in this sector. 3 laps through the maze, Ra continued. Full combat rules, weapons hot, shields active. First to complete 3 laps wins. The loser, she paused dramatically. The loser publicly admits their species' inferiority and agrees never to pilot in galactic space again. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She had heard horror stories about the Titan maze. Even experienced pilots sometimes didn't come back from training runs, but backing down now would validate everything Ra had said about humans. Agreed, Sarah said. Excellent, Ra clapped her 4 hands together. We'll meet at the racing docks tomorrow at 800 station time. I do hope you have a well-prepared little human. It would be tragic if your family never learned how you died. As Sarah walked back to her table, she could hear the excited chatter filling the cantina. Word of the duel would spread quickly. By tomorrow morning, half the station would probably be watching. She sat down heavily and finished her synthetic whiskey in one gulp. What had she just gotten herself into? She was a good pilot, excellent, even, but she was going up against the best pilot in known space in one of the most dangerous courses ever designed. She thought about the ships available to her. The standard Terran fighters were reliable but not designed for racing. They were built for durability and firepower, not speed and maneuverability. A shadow fell across her table. Sarah looked up to see a grizzled maintenance chief named Murphy, a human who had been working on Nexus Station for over a decade. His face was weathered, and his hands were permanently stained with engine grease. Commander, he said quietly, sitting down without invitation. I heard what just happened. Word travels fast, Sarah muttered. Faster than you might like, the whole station's buzzing about it. Murphy leaned forward. That, she's not just good, she's legendary, and the Titan maze. Well, let's just say the mortality rate speaks for itself. Are you here to talk me out of it? Murphy shook his head. Nope, I'm here to help you win. Sarah raised an eyebrow. How? I've been working on something in my spare time. A little pet project, you might say. Modified Terran fighter with some improvements. Nothing illegal, mind you, but definitely not standard issue. What kind of improvements? Murphy's eyes gleamed. The kind that might give a human pilot the edge she needs against a 4-armed show-off. Interested. Sarah looked around the cantina one more time. Ra was still holding court, probably already planning her victory speech. The other aliens were looking at Sarah with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. None of them believed a human could win. Show me, Sarah said. They left the cantina together, walking through the station's corridors toward the maintenance bays. As they walked, Murphy explained what he had been working on. See, the problem with our standard fighters is that they're designed for human reflexes and human thinking patterns. But that's also their strength. They're intuitive to us in a way no alien ship could be. I've been wondering what would happen if we enhanced that natural compatibility instead of trying to copy alien designs. They reached the maintenance bay, and Murphy led her to a corner where a single fighter sat under a tarp. When he pulled the cover away, Sarah gasped. The ship looked like a standard Terran fighter at first glance, but the details were all wrong. The hull was sleeker, the engine pods larger, and there were modifications she didn't recognize scattered across its surface. But what struck her most was how right it looked, as if someone had taken the basic design and perfected it. I call her the Phoenix, Murphy said proudly. She's got enhanced neural interfaces, upgraded engines, and some experimental inertial dampeners I've been tinkering with, but the real magic is in the control system. He led her to the cockpit and showed her the interior. Instead of the usual array of switches and displays, there was a clean, almost minimal setup. Everything runs through direct neural interface. No need to think about which button to press or which lever to pull. You think, she responds. It's like flying with your own body instead of a machine. Sarah ran her hand along the pilot's seat. Will it work? It'll work. Question is, will you? Sarah thought about Ra's confident smile, about the way she had dismissed human pilots as primitive bipeds, about the laughter of her friends. Tomorrow, she would find out if human determination could overcome alien superiority. There's only one way to find out, she said. The next morning came faster than Sarah would have liked. She had barely slept, spending most of the night reading everything she could find about the Titan maze and studying the Phoenix's systems. The ship was unlike anything she had ever flown, but Murphy had been right about the intuitive controls. During her brief test flight, it had felt less like piloting a machine and more like extending her own body into space. The racing docks were crowded with spectators. Word of the duel had indeed spread throughout the station, and it seemed like every off-duty pilot, mechanic, and administrator had come to watch. The mood was festive, but Sarah could hear the undercurrent of skepticism in the conversations around her. Poor kid doesn't know what she's gotten into. Shame to see a young pilot throw her life away. Someone should have talked her out of it. Ra arrived with characteristic flair, her sleek racer gleaming under the dock lights. The ship was a work of art, all flowing curves and impossible angles that seemed to bend space around them. It looked fast just sitting still, and Sarah could see why dominated galactic racing. Their ships were as much extensions of their four-armed physiology as the Phoenix was designed to be an extension of human intuition. The pilot spotted Sarah and approached with a predatory smile. Good morning, little human. I trust you slept well. It may have been your last peaceful night. I slept fine, Sarah replied, checking the Phoenix's pre-flight systems. Looking forward to the race. Ra's smile faltered slightly. She had probably expected fear, nervousness, maybe even a last-minute withdrawal. Sarah's calm confidence was clearly not what she had anticipated. How noble, Ra said. I almost admire your foolish courage. When this is over, I'll make sure your death is remembered as a cautionary tale about knowing one's limitations. The race coordinator, a officious named, approached with the standard waiver forms. Pilots, you understand the risks involved in this course. The station disclaims all responsibility for injury or death. Medical teams are standing by, but at the speeds you'll be traveling, their assistance may be limited. Both pilots signed the forms without hesitation. Very well, announced through the dock's communication system. Pilots, you have 5 minutes to complete final preparations. The race will begin when both ships cross the starting threshold. Sarah climbed into the Phoenix's cockpit and began the startup sequence. As the neural interface came online, she felt the ship's systems integrating with her consciousness. It was an odd sensation. Suddenly she could feel the reactor's heartbeat, sense the exact position of every control surface, and perceive the gravitational currents around the station. Through the canopy, she could see Ra going through her own preparations. The four arms moved in perfect coordination, manipulating controls with a fluid grace that was beautiful to watch. Her ship's engines came online with a musical hum that seemed to harmonize with the station's own mechanical rhythms. Pilots approach the starting line, his voice crackled through the comm. Sarah guided the Phoenix out of the dock and toward the designated starting position. The Titan maze loomed ahead of them, a massive construction of spinning metal and crackling energy barriers. Even from a distance, it looked like a mechanical nightmare designed by someone with a particularly twisted imagination. The two ships lined up side by side. Ra's racer was noticeably larger than the Phoenix, its alien curves making Sarah's ship look primitive by comparison. But as the neural interface fully synchronized, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. The Phoenix might not look like much, but she could feel its potential thrumming through the connection. On my mark, announced, 3, 2, 1, begin. Both ships shot forward like bullets, their engines lighting up the space around the starting line. The race to prove human worth had begun. The first section of the Titan maze was a gauntlet of rotating blade assemblies, each one the size of a city block and spinning at different speeds. Ra shot ahead immediately, her racer dancing between the massive cutting edges with fluid precision. Sarah followed, the Phoenix responding to her thoughts as naturally as her own heartbeat. The neural interface was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Instead of fighting the ship's controls, she simply thought about where she wanted to go, and the Phoenix flowed through space like liquid lightning. When a massive blade swept toward her position, she didn't consciously decide to roll and dive. The maneuver simply happened, as if her body had naturally moved out of the way. Ra was setting a punishing pace, pushing her ship through gaps that seemed impossible for anything larger than a fighter drone. Her four arms moved in perfect coordination, adjusting thruster output, manipulating control surfaces, and monitoring dozens of readouts simultaneously. This was what she had been born for, what her species had evolved to do. But Sarah was keeping up. The revelation seemed to surprise Ra as much as it did the spectators watching from the safety of the station. The pilot glanced back through her canopy, her large eyes widening as she saw the Phoenix matching her maneuvers with increasing confidence. They cleared the blade section and entered the gravity wells, artificial gravitational fields that created invisible whirlpools in space. Ships had to navigate by feel and instinct, using the gravitational currents to slingshot through the course while avoiding the crushing forces at each well's center. This was where superiority should have been most obvious. Their enlarged brains were specifically adapted for three-dimensional thinking and spatial reasoning. They could visualize gravitational fields in ways that most species couldn't even comprehend. Ra dove into the first gravity well with practiced expertise, using its pull to accelerate while riding the outer edge to avoid being crushed. Her ship traced a perfect spiral that translated gravitational force into forward momentum. It was a textbook maneuver, executed flawlessly. Sarah approached the same well differently. Instead of fighting the gravitational forces or trying to calculate the perfect trajectory, she let the Phoenix feel its way through. The ship's enhanced sensors fed data directly into her nervous system, and she could sense the gravity currents like a fish sensing water flow. She didn't plan her route, she felt it. The result was a path through the gravity well that was somehow more efficient than Ra's textbook approach. Where they had followed the established racing line, Sarah found herself discovering new possibilities that the course designers had never intended. She pulled alongside Ra as they exited the gravity wells, and for the first time, she saw something other than arrogance in the alien pilot's expression. There was confusion there, and the beginning of what might have been concern. The third section was a plasma corridor, a narrow tunnel between walls of superheated gas that would vaporize any ship that strayed too close. The corridor twisted and turned unpredictably, and pilots had to maintain precise positioning while traveling at tremendous speeds. It was here that many racers lost their lives. Their ships turned to expanding clouds of metallic vapor. Ra entered the corridor first, her ship skimming the plasma walls with millimeters to spare. The heat readings in her cockpit had to be approaching critical levels, but she maintained her speed without flinching. This was the kind of flying that had made her a legend. Sarah followed into the plasma tunnel and immediately understood why so many pilots died here. The heat was incredible, even with the Phoenix's enhanced shielding. The tunnel walls seemed to pulse and shift, creating an optical illusion that made it nearly impossible to judge distances accurately. But the neural interface changed everything. Instead of relying on her eyes, Sarah could feel the plasma walls through the ship's sensors. The Phoenix became an extension of her nervous system, and she could sense the tunnel's boundaries as clearly as she could feel the edges of her own body. She began to gain on Ra. The pilot's four-armed advantage was working against her here. She was processing too much information, trying to manage too many inputs simultaneously. Her superior brain was analyzing every sensor reading, calculating optimal trajectories, monitoring system status across dozens of displays. Sarah wasn't thinking at all. She was flying on pure instinct, trusting the Phoenix to translate her intentions into action. When the plasma wall curved left, she simply wanted to go left, and the ship obliged. When the tunnel narrowed, she naturally slowed just enough to maintain safe clearance. She pulled ahead of Ra halfway through the plasma corridor. The spectators watching from Nexus Station erupted in surprised cheers. No one had expected the human pilot to last 5 minutes, let alone take the lead in the most dangerous section of the course. Ra's expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching shock. In all her years of racing, no pilot had ever challenged her in a plasma run. Her species had dominated this type of flying for centuries. It was supposed to be impossible for a two-armed primitive to match precision. But Sarah wasn't just matching it, she was exceeding it. They exited the plasma corridor neck and neck, both ships glowing from heat absorption but intact. The first lap was complete, and already the race was nothing like what anyone had expected. The second lap began immediately, and Ra pushed her ship even harder. Her pride was on the line now, along with the reputation of her entire species. She threw her racer into the blade section with reckless aggression, taking risks that would have been suicidal for a lesser pilot. Sarah matched her maneuver for maneuver. The Phoenix seemed to anticipate the rotating blades, finding paths through the maze that appeared moments before they were needed. The ship and pilot were becoming something greater than the sum of their parts, a synthesis of human intuition and advanced technology that created new possibilities. In the gravity wells, both pilots pushed their ships to the limits of structural integrity. G-forces that should have knocked them unconscious became manageable through sheer determination and adrenaline. They traced impossible paths through the gravitational fields, their ships screaming protest as they exceeded design parameters. Sarah began to understand something that Ra hadn't anticipated. Human pilots weren't inferior because they had 2 arms instead of 4, or smaller brains or slower reflexes. They were different, and that difference could be an advantage in the right circumstances. Pilots flew with mathematical precision, calculating optimal solutions and executing them flawlessly. Human pilots flew with intuition and adaptation, feeling their way through problems that couldn't be solved with pure computation. In a ship designed to amplify those natural human strengths, the combination was devastating. The second lap ended with Sarah maintaining a narrow lead, but Ra was far from finished. The pilot's initial shock had transformed into grim determination. She had underestimated her opponent, but she was still the superior pilot. This was just a matter of applying the right amount of pressure. As they began the final lap, Ra made her move. Instead of following the established racing line through the blade section, she began using her ship's weapons. Plasma bolts lanced out from her racer, not aimed at Sarah directly, but at the maze structure itself. She was creating new obstacles, forcing the blade assemblies to shift their rotation patterns in response to impacts. It was a brilliant tactical move. The course was designed to be predictable within certain parameters. By introducing chaos, Ra was leveling the playing field. Human intuition was an advantage when the environment followed certain rules, but in complete chaos, superior processing power and four-armed coordination should dominate. Sarah found herself dodging not just the spinning blades, but the debris from Ra's weapon impacts. Chunks of metal spun through space unpredictably, and the blade assemblies had begun rotating in erratic patterns. The neural interface was struggling to keep up with the rapidly changing environment. For the first time since the race began, Sarah fell behind. Ra pressed her advantage, using her weapons to create even more chaos. She was turning the Titan maze into something resembling a combat zone, where survival depended on processing multiple threats simultaneously while maintaining racing speeds. But as they approached the gravity wells, Sarah began to adapt. The Phoenix might not be able to predict the chaos, but it could react to it. Instead of trying to plan routes through the shifting obstacles, Sarah stopped planning entirely. She let her subconscious take control, trusting instincts she didn't even know she possessed. The result was flying that rational analysis. Sarah's ship seemed to slip between obstacles that shouldn't have had gaps, finding pockets of safety in the chaos that existed for mere fractions of a second. She wasn't calculating these maneuvers, she was feeling them. Gradually, she began to close the gap with Ra again. The pilot's confidence started to crack. She was flying beyond her limits, pushing her ship and herself harder than she ever had before. Her forearms were moving so fast they were almost a blur, but somehow the human was still gaining ground. In the gravity wells, Sarah made her move. Instead of following Ra through the established paths, she dove directly toward one of the gravity well centers, a maneuver that should have been instantly fatal. But at the last possible moment, she used the crushing gravitational force to slingshot around the well's edge, gaining tremendous speed while riding the very edge of destruction. It was a move that no sane pilot would attempt, because the margin for error was measured in centimeters at those velocities. But Sarah wasn't calculating the risks. She was feeling the gravitational currents like a surfer reading a wave, and the Phoenix responded to her intentions with perfect precision. She rocketed past Ra, taking the lead as they headed into the final plasma corridor. The pilot's expression was no longer just shocked, it was approaching something like panic. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Humans were not supposed to be better pilots than. It went against everything she had been taught, everything her culture believed about their place in the galaxy. But as they entered the plasma corridor for the final time, Sarah was definitely in the lead, and she was pulling away. Ra made one last desperate gamble. She activated her ship's afterburners, flooding the plasma corridor with additional energy that made the walls even more dangerous. At the same time, she began firing her weapons wildly, trying to create enough chaos to force Sarah into a mistake. The corridor became a nightmare of superheated plasma, weapons fire, and unpredictable energy discharges. Any normal pilot would have been forced to slow down or risk being vaporized. But Sarah wasn't flying like a normal pilot anymore. The Phoenix seemed to dance between the energy discharges, its hull glowing cherry red from heat absorption, but holding together through sheer determination and superior engineering. Sarah could feel the ship's pain through the neural interface, but she could also feel its determination, as if the machine itself wanted to prove that human engineering could match anything the galaxy had to offer. They cleared the plasma corridor with Sarah still in the lead, but Ra was close behind, her ship smoking but still functional. The finish line was just ahead, a simple threshold that marked the completion of 3 laps through the Titan maze. Both pilots pushed their ships to the absolute limit, their engines screaming protest as they demanded every erg of available power. The Phoenix and Ra's racer were neck and neck, separated by mere meters as they approached the line. In the final moments, Ra tried one last desperate maneuver. She attempted to ram Sarah's ship, figuring that if she couldn't win, she could at least eliminate her opponent and claim a technical victory. But Sarah saw it coming. Through the neural interface, she could feel Ra's intentions almost as clearly as her own. At the last possible second, she rolled the Phoenix out of the way, letting the ship streak harmlessly past. Sarah crossed the finish line first, by less than a ship's length. The silence from Nexus Station was deafening. For a moment, no one seemed to believe what they had just witnessed. A human pilot had not only survived the Titan maze, but had defeated the greatest racer in known space. Then the cheers began. The docking bay erupted in chaos as both ships returned to Nexus Station. Sarah's hands were shaking as she powered down the Phoenix's systems, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The neural interface slowly disconnected, leaving her feeling strangely empty, as if part of her consciousness had been pulled away. Through the cockpit canopy, she could see crowds of spectators pressing against the safety barriers. Humans were cheering and embracing each other, while most of the alien observers stood in stunned silence. Several pilots who had been watching were engaged in heated discussions, their forearms gesticulating wildly. Murphy was the first to reach her ship, his weathered face split by an enormous grin. "Commander, that was the most beautiful flying I've ever seen in 30 years of maintaining ships." Sarah climbed out of the cockpit on unsteady legs. The gravity felt strange after 3 laps of constant maneuvering through artificial gravitational fields. "I can't believe it actually worked," she said, her voice hoarse from the stress of the race. "Worked? Hell, it was poetry in motion. You didn't just beat her, you redefined what's possible." Across the bay, Ra was emerging from her own ship. The pilot moved slowly, as if she was in physical pain. Her elegant racer showed signs of the punishing race, scorch marks from the plasma walls, small dents from debris impacts, and one of the engine pods was smoking ominously. But it was Ra's expression that truly revealed the magnitude of what had just happened. The arrogant confidence that had defined her personality was gone, replaced by something Sarah had never seen in her before: genuine confusion and the beginning of what might have been humility. The crowd parted as Ra walked slowly across the bay toward Sarah. Her large, dark eyes were fixed on the human pilot with an intensity that made several bystanders step back nervously. When she was close enough for private conversation, she stopped and studied Sarah for a long moment. "How?" she asked simply. Sarah wasn't sure how to answer. "I'm not entirely sure myself. The ship, the neural interface, intuition, it all came together somehow." "No," Ra shook her head, causing the intricate tattoos on her arms to shift and dance. It was more than technology. I have flown ships with neural interfaces before. What you did, it was impossible. A crowd was gathering around them now, spectators from dozens of different species all trying to get closer to the two pilots. Sarah could hear fragments of conversation in multiple languages, but the tone was universal: amazement, disbelief, and heated debate. Maybe what you thought was impossible was just improbable, Sarah suggested. Maybe humans aren't as limited as you believed. Ra's expression shifted through several emotions: anger, confusion, and finally something that might have been the beginning of respect. For 2 centuries, my people have dominated galactic racing. We have won every major championship, set every significant speed record, and pioneered every major advancement in racing technology. It is not arrogance to state these facts. It is simply acknowledging reality. And now I must question what I thought I knew about reality. Ra looked back at her damaged ship, then at the Phoenix. Your vessel is impressive, but not revolutionary. The neural interface is sophisticated, but we have seen similar systems before. The victory was not won by superior technology. Sarah nodded slowly. So what do you think made the difference? You flew like? Ra paused, clearly struggling with concepts that didn't translate well into galactic standard. In our language, we have a word. It means to become one with the void, to fly not as a pilot controlling a ship, but as a consciousness extending itself into space. It is considered the highest form of piloting, achieved only by the most enlightened masters after decades of meditation and practice. And you achieved in your first race in the Titan maze. It should have taken you decades to reach that level of unity with your ship. Ra's voice carried a note of bewilderment. How is such a thing possible? Before Sarah could answer, the crowd around them parted to admit several officials. The race coordinator was approaching with a grim expression, flanked by station security officers. Behind them came a delegation of officials, their formal robes marking them as representatives of their government. Commander said formally, "Congratulations on your victory. However, there are some concerns that need to be addressed." What kind of concerns? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew what was coming. One of the officials stepped forward, his 4 arms folded in a gesture that Sarah recognized as formal displeasure. The racing consortium is calling for a formal investigation into possible illegal modifications to your vessel. Such a dramatic upset of established racing hierarchy suggests the use of forbidden technology. Murphy, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward angrily. Every modification on that ship has been documented and approved. I've got the paperwork to prove it. Nevertheless, the official continued, we must verify that no prohibited enhancements were used. The integrity of galactic racing depends on maintaining strict technical regulations. Sarah felt her temper rising. So when a wins, it's natural superiority, but when a human wins, it must be cheating. That is not what we are suggesting, the official replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. We are simply following standard procedure for investigating unusual race results. Ross suddenly spoke up, her voice carrying clearly across the growing crowd. There was no cheating. The official turned to her with surprise. Champion, surely you cannot be certain. I am certain, Ra interrupted. I monitored her ship's energy signatures throughout the race. No illegal technology was employed. Her victory was achieved through superior piloting skill, nothing more. The admission sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. For the greatest racing champion to publicly acknowledge a human's superior skill was unprecedented. Several of the officials looked as if they had been physically struck. But champion, one of them protested, this contradicts everything we know about comparative species capabilities. Perhaps the stress of the race affected your judgment. My judgment is sound, Ra said coldly. It is our assumptions that have proven to be flawed. She turned to face Sarah directly. According to the terms of our duel, I must now publicly acknowledge my defeat and the superiority of your piloting skill. Sarah shook her head. That's not necessary. You proved you're an exceptional pilot today. One race doesn't determine overall superiority. Nevertheless, I was defeated, and by the terms I myself set. Ra raised her voice so that everyone in the bay could hear her clearly. I, Ra, 5-time galactic racing champion, acknowledge that I have been defeated in fair combat by Commander Sarah of the Terran Space Fleet. Her skill exceeded my own, and I withdraw my previous statements about the limitations of human pilots. The crowd erupted in chaos, were arguing loudly among themselves, while humans cheered and embraced. Other species seemed to be processing the implications of what they had just witnessed. But Sarah was focused on Ra's expression. Despite the formal words of defeat, the pilot didn't look humiliated. Instead, she looked intrigued. "I have a proposition for you," Ra said quietly, leaning closer so only Sarah could hear. "The Galactic Championship races begin in 3 months. Enter as a human representative." "What?" "If what happened today was not a fluke, if humans truly possess piloting capabilities that we have underestimated, then prove it on the largest stage possible. Race against the best pilots from every species in known space." Sarah felt a chill of excitement and terror. The Galactic Championships were the ultimate test of piloting skill, held every 5 years with representatives from hundreds of species. The courses were even more dangerous than the Titan maze, and the political implications were enormous. "Why are you suggesting this?" Sarah asked. "Because today you have shown me that I have been wrong about something fundamental. If I have been wrong about human piloting capabilities, what else might I be wrong about? What other assumptions has my species made that need to be challenged?" Ra paused, looking out at the crowd of mixed species surrounding them. "For too long, we have believed ourselves superior to all other pilots. Perhaps it is time to discover what the galaxy is truly capable of when species compete on equal terms. And if I lose badly in the championships, then we will have learned something valuable about the limits of human potential. But if you win," Ra's expression grew thoughtful, "if you win, it will change how every species in the galaxy thinks about their place in the cosmic hierarchy." Sarah looked around at the chaos surrounding them. The implications of today's race were already rippling outward. Reports were probably already being transmitted to a dozen, carrying news that would challenge centuries of assumptions about species superiority. "I'll consider it," she said finally. Ra nodded. "That is all I ask. But know this, if you do enter the championships, you will not be facing pilots who underestimate humans. Word of today's race will spread quickly. You will have the attention and respect of every pilot in the galaxy. And the pressure that comes with it. Yes, you will carry the hopes and expectations of your entire species. Every human in space will be watching to see if today was an anomaly or a glimpse of humanity's true potential." The crowd began to disperse as station security moved to clear the docking bay. As officials and spectators drifted away, Sarah found herself standing with Murphy and Ra beside the Phoenix. "So what happens now?" Murphy asked. Ra answered before Sarah could. "Now the galaxy changes. Today we learned that species superiority is not as fixed as we believed. Tomorrow we must discover what else we have been wrong about." She turned to Sarah one final time. "You have given me a great gift today, Commander. You have shown me that there is still much to learn about flying and about life. I will not forget this lesson." As the pilot walked away, her damaged ship being towed to the repair bays, Sarah felt the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. She had come to the cantina last night as an unknown diplomatic officer. She was leaving as a pilot who had challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. "Commander," Murphy said quietly, "whatever you decide about those championships, you should know something. Today wasn't just about you beating her in a race. It was about proving that humans belong out here among the stars, that we're not just some primitive species that got lucky with faster-than-light travel." Sarah nodded, looking out at the stars visible through the station's viewports. Somewhere out there were hundreds of species, each with their own assumptions about what they could and couldn't accomplish, about which species were naturally superior and which were inherently limited. Today had proven that those assumptions could be wrong. 3 months later, when the first human pilot in galactic history crossed the finish line to win the overall galactic championship, the celebration could be heard on a dozen worlds. But for Sarah, the real victory had happened in a cantina on Nexus Station, when an arrogant alien pilot had dared a human to prove her worth. She had, and in doing so, she had changed not just her own destiny, but the destiny of every human who would follow her into the vast darkness between the stars. The galaxy was full of possibilities, and humanity was finally ready to explore them all. In the months that followed, applications for human pilots in galactic racing circuits increased by over 3,000%. Ra would go on to become Sarah's fiercest rival and closest friend. pushing both pilots to achieve levels of performance that redefined what was considered possible. But more importantly, the other species of the galaxy began to look at humans with new eyes. They saw not primitive bipeds who had stumbled onto interstellar technology, but potential partners who might contribute something unique to galactic civilization. The duel that had begun with insults in a cantina had ended with the opening of infinite possibilities among the stars. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah could still feel the echo of the Phoenix's neural interface, reminding her that the best victories were not those that proved superiority, but those that revealed new potential in everyone involved. The galaxy was vast, and there was always more to discover,